Thank you, everyone, for joining the Anthem Vault interview series. Today, I'm happy to say we have the Communications Director for Overstock.com, Judd Bagley. And from what I understand, Judd is Patrick Byrne's right-hand man. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I do want to say a quick thank you to Overstock's involvement in the cryptocurrency community altogether. I really think it's done a lot to increase the visibility and user base of blockchain technologies and alternative currencies. So thank you so much.
It seems wrong to be receiving any praise on that front because we've felt from the beginning that philosophically it's just the right thing to do. But I appreciate that.
So while the crypto community right now is debating on the potential new fork in the network and its overall success, I'd like to find out what your opinion and Overstock's opinion is on the brand of Bitcoin. You all have tons of experience with branding and running a successful company, and I know Bitcoin is a network, but pitching it to new users can almost seem like a PR battle at times. So how do you feel about Bitcoin's brand, and do you see any changes that need to be made?
You know, one of the things that's interesting about Bitcoin's brand is you really, at this stage of its development, you can't separate it from the community. It's a kind of a true grassroots movement that's really ground up, and the community has done an enormous amount to drive it. Now, I find myself recently becoming a little frustrated with the community over the whole issue of the fork, but that's a subject for another conversation. But on the whole, I think the community has really been the heart and soul of the kind of the crypto movement, and it's worked to our advantage definitely, as these folks are very zealous and loyal, and so we've acquired a lot of real high quality new customers without really having to spend any money on marketing itself. It's happened through Reddit and the blogs and the other channels. So that part is great. One thing that's challenging about the Bitcoin brand, if we zoom out a little bit, is that its early kind of mainstream media exposure has been, I'd say, probably 80-20 negative to positive. So, it's interesting. We started accepting Bitcoin in about January 9th of 2014. And that was both within a few days of the high point of Bitcoin value. We were at about $1,200 at that time. But then we had all these assaults like Mt. Gox in particular, and Silk Road and things like that. And so it was a real kind of a conundrum for us. On the one hand, wanting to be out there shouting about the fact that we were accepting this new, currency, but at the same time having people wonder, and indeed call our customer service people wondering if when Mt. Gox was hacked, if that for some reason meant that indeed Overstock.com was hacked. So it was there's the other side of that equation, which is a real struggle to get through. Now, I think that what's going to smooth out that road and move cryptocurrency into, I basically look at it this way. At what point will my parents use this? They are as untech savvy as, a couple of humans that you'll ever find. At one point will they use this? And they will not probably trust this system as a way of exchange of currency initially. However, I think what they will do is at some point, so for example, right now they're trying to sell their home. And if somebody came up to them and said, it's going to cost you $1,500 to transfer the title the normal way, or we can do it this other way, and it may only cost you, say, $20 or $50 or something. I think they would say, let's just do it the other way. Now, what they would, I think, learn eventually is the difference is the old way was the old way. The new way maybe was using the blockchain to transfer the title. That would seem like a much lower risk approach, and that I think that would, in other words, that wouldn't seem nearly as risky as the idea of transferring currency using this strange new technology, and then maybe become exposed to other users of the blockchain, and then eventually would come around and would be told, oh, this other technology that you've come to depend on, and you find that it saves time and money, can also be used for exchanging currency. And at that point, I think my parents would say, oh, well, let's I know it works for this other stuff. Let's try it for this thing too. So until that happens, the Bitcoin brand is always going to be enigmatic and a bit inaccessible to the mainstream public. So we're real big fans of the development of these kind of Bitcoin 2.0 uses, applications. In other words, using the blockchain to accomplish currency transfers of value.
I think that's one of the strongest arguments that's come out within the past year when people are talking about widespread adoption, that there's so much promise in blockchain technologies with smart contracts and all of, like you had mentioned, Bitcoin companies coming out that are using the blockchain in ways we never would have guessed when we all first discovered Bitcoin as the currency. It all took us by storm with the huge price jump. You guys are the pro in terms of retail implementation of Bitcoin payments. And I know we were just talking about how, the true beauty of the Bitcoin network is blockchain technologies in general. But I do want to focus on the currency and payment processing of Bitcoin. So what are some of the pros and cons you've seen using Bitcoin as a form of payment at Overstock?
Well, I have yet to come up with any cons.
Oh, great. That's good to hear.
Yeah, it was, well, okay, I don't want to contradict what I said just a couple of minutes ago, that there is that small, that tiny infinitesimal nearly perception that we experienced not long after we began accepting Bitcoin. And then again, when Mt. Gox was hacked, people wondered if for some reason that meant something had happened to us because of that connection. So, that was, but we dealt with that. It's interesting in business. There's a real truism that has to do with unanticipated costs. Just about everything that I've ever been a part of, we sit and we examine and we study it. And we really think we've looked at every angle in terms of costs that may be associated with it or complications, and then we move ahead. And it's not until you actually start slinging code, testing, putting stuff in front of consumers, that you then come to the realization that, there was this cost that we hadn't anticipated. What's really interesting about Bitcoin so far, accepting it at Overstock, is it's been entirely unanticipated savings. So, one example is Bitcoin shoppers tend to spend probably 25 to 30% more than the rest of our shoppers. They tend to come back quite a bit, and not only that, but they're very eager to evangelize it to other people and use the strength of the existing Bitcoin community. So we're finding that we've attracted some loyal people. They spend more money. They spend it on higher margin products like housewares and things like that. We thought that we were going to get a lot of Bitcoin shoppers were going to primarily buy a lot of electronics things, and we don't. Our margins are very, very thin in that area, and instead, it's not worked out like that. They're not necessarily the geeks we expected them to be. They're buying towels and end tables and rugs and the things that we do a really good job of sourcing and where our margins are nice and healthy. So that's been great. And
that's an incredible metric to hear. Just as a personal Bitcoin user, I actually used Overstock to buy a new bedspread and paid in Bitcoin. And, I would consider myself one of the Bitcoin nerds. So there you go.
Yeah. So see, this is we hear this all the time. And I'll tell you the biggest surprise we have among the top 10 products that we sell to Bitcoin users is, I think, there are two interesting things to note. One is that number 8, and these are numbers I gathered just yesterday in anticipation of this conversation. Number 8 was men's fragrances. So it's good to know Bitcoin users are out there smelling good.
That's
and then,
good. And 98% of Bitcoin users are men. So yeah, obviously it's going to be more male-centric products.
Then, when you check out, you're given the option of donating $1 or so to some nonprofits, for example, the Wounded Warrior Project. And so those donations fall under their own. The number 2 most common item they're spending money on are donations, and that's way ahead of other people that are paying with credit card or even PayPal. So it's good to know that Bitcoin users are also generous. So yeah, we appreciate that about them. It's also interesting to know where Bitcoin users are. So, just in terms of sheer number of purchases, California obviously comes out first because there are 30 million people in California. But if you account for population and you look at purchases per, say, 10,000 or 1 million people, number one by far is New Hampshire. So that makes some sense because New Hampshire is kind of the libertarian mecca of the United States.
With the Free State Project there,
Exactly.
I've been to events there, and Bitcoin is always the headline topic.
So New Hampshire comes out first by far. Up until very recently, Utah, where Overstock.com happens to be located, was number 2, although we've just been edged out by Washington, D.C. So you have New Hampshire, Washington, D.C., and then Utah. And then Washington State and Colorado and Nevada are all kind of in the top 10. You don't get to places like New York and Texas and others until you're kind of down in the 20s. And sadly, as seems to be the case with most economic indicators, Mississippi comes in dead last. So we need to pick things up there.
And out of curiosity, has Overstock taken a position on doing Bitcoin business with New York at all? I know there was a mass exodus of Bitcoin companies out of New York, and many companies that resisted doing Bitcoin business with New York State.
We've not taken a position on that so far. The bit license subject doesn't immediately affect it obviously doesn't affect our ability to accept Bitcoin as payment, but we tend to agree with the larger industry's perspective that it's a poor solution to this problem. So we're supporters philosophically, but we haven't taken any additional steps.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing those metrics. I find them wildly interesting. And, speaking on philosophy, and it seems as though the team at Overstock has a very staunch stance on sound money, alternative currency, freedom of choice. So fiat currency seems to be doing a darn good job at the moment, holding the number 1 spot as always by force. But as people are still learning the weaknesses behind it, people disagree with the system of fiat currency, but unfortunately it's what we're mandated with at the moment. But do you see, or does Overstock, Patrick, people who are involved in this community see things like gold, silver, or Bitcoin making their way into the mainstream as currency?
This is a really interesting chicken and egg problem. Moving back a few minutes, where you were talking about our accepting Bitcoin as a retailer. We currently go through Coinbase, and we've received a certain amount of criticism because Coinbase immediately converts Bitcoin to dollars. So dollars are what we receive. Right. So there's some people that are saying, well, if you really believed in this, you'd receive Bitcoin. We do actually have it worked out where 10% of all purchases we do get in Bitcoin. So we have a pretty decent reserve built up. But the problem is at this point, we can't pay our employees in Bitcoin. We can't pay our taxes in Bitcoin. We can't pay our suppliers in Bitcoin. We can't pay our light bill in Bitcoin. So it's really of limited use to us as a business in the purely practical business sense. So in other words, we have no choice but to use fiat. Now, it's worth noting that the great state of Utah, where we are, the upcoming legislative session is going to consider a bill that would make it possible to pay state taxes in Bitcoin. So that's a good move. But
and recently they passed legislation where you can pay your taxes in gold and silver, if I remember right.
Exactly. So there's a real sort of a libertarian sort of a streak in the state legislature that allows for sort of a healthy distrust of centralized institutions like the federal government. So that's good. But so that time may come, but until those sorts of things are worked out, at one point we just looked at it and said, well, the Bitcoin experiment's going so well, let's offer employees the option of getting paid a portion of their paycheck in Bitcoin. So we went ahead and we found a Bitcoin ATM, and we had it installed here in our corporate headquarters, and then assigned our payroll people. Just said, okay, now go ahead and figure out how to do this. Well, it didn't take much digging into it to figure out that this becomes a real problem, because you get into this money transmitter problem. So if you want to pay an employee with Bitcoin, you have two problems. One is the IRS currently views Bitcoin as property, not currency. So there are some real difficult to grapple with implications there. Number two is there are companies that come up with these solutions, and everyone's kind of giving it their best shot, but then these are such Rube Goldberg machine as kind of ways to do this. It really it doesn't work. So a lot of stuff has to happen where laws are concerned to catch up to make it easy, just so our employees, for example, have the option of getting paid in Bitcoin. That's to say nothing of all the other accounts payable that we have that we'd like to use that way. So that's one of the big challenges for us is and for everybody really. And I think that the bit license situation is a good example of this. Is just the way the laws and regulations are going to struggle and flail around for a while until they figure it out. And until those things happen, getting back to what you were talking about earlier, fiat is going to be the thing we're all using. I mean, everybody always talks about Bitcoin, the value of Bitcoin in terms of its value in dollars still. I think that's kind of funny. So many of us are kind of into this because of our desire to move away from fiat, but yet in the end, that's how we assess the value of this thing. So until we can get some of these other things squared away and make it a more valid payment option, fiat's always going to be the thing that we default back to.
Right. I unwillingly, but must agree with you on that.
Yeah.
So speaking on regulation, the money service transmitter regulations have really hurt the Bitcoin economy. As of late, a new article came out that commodity-backed cryptocurrencies or tokens, much like Colorcoin and different companies like that, are really taking a hit. So do you see a future for commodity-backed cryptocurrencies, gold-backed cryptocurrencies?
The first time I heard about this movement toward gold-backed cryptocurrency, I thought that just felt right. I mean, that's the sort of thing I've been watching pretty eagerly. I think, like everybody else in the community, I think that could be a real solid application of this, of this technology. And but again, the last time I checked into this, adoption of it, this was still all very theory. So, adoption of it is probably going to be even a bigger challenge than it has been so far for regular, purely digital cryptocurrencies. But yeah, and I know Patrick Byrne, who's a real fan of gold as a store of value, is also watching that really closely.
Well, and to kind of bridge off of that, the crypto security that Patrick's setting up, is there any current updates on that?
We're calling it T0. That's letter T, number 0.com. And the T0 platform is going to operate two different ways. You'll be able to trade, and you indeed currently can trade, shares of private debt that public companies issue, so bonds, in other words. And we've started with that because the regulatory threshold for being able to do that is very low. In fact, it's almost non-existent. So we didn't need the SEC's approval to issue and make available for trading a cryptocurrency that represents shares of debt. Now, bond issuance. Mm-hmm. So we got that done. That's primarily proof of concept, but that's out there. The main event, however, is the capacity to trade equities, public equities. So, shares of public companies. That is something where the regulatory threshold is quite high and onerous, and but we want to play this right down the middle. We recognize our role as pioneers in this space, so we want to be the ones who take one for the larger team and get and go through the process of getting complete regulatory buy-in and approval of this. So we're going through that process right now. We've filed a document. We did this about 3 months ago. It's called an S3, and the way this kind of works is we submit it, our proposal. The SEC then comes back with questions that we answer in the form of amendments to our original proposal, and then they come back with questions, and then we answer. So we are in the middle of the third round of this. So we've submitted our third round of responses to their questions, and it's on their desks right now, and we're hoping to hear back from them in the next few weeks. We think we're pretty close to getting to a product that they'll give their stamp of approval to. So hopefully by the end of this year, this platform will be in beta and in a spot where the average retail investor, certainly the average institutional investor, can then invest in and trade the first public crypto security.
Sure. And for our listeners, can you explain a little bit on how a public crypto-based security is beneficial versus the current security exchange system?
I referenced the name of the company. We're calling it T0, and that comes from that's kind of to differentiate ourselves from the status quo, where once you trade, if you have some stock and you sell it, it's 3 days before you can gain access to the money. Because it takes 3 days for stock trades to settle currently. They call that T+3, trade date plus 3 days. T0 is a reference to the fact that the trade and the settlement happen simultaneously. So it's T0. In other words, it's trade plus nothing. It happens immediately. So that's one of the first areas where we think investors will find this attractive, the idea that the settlement happens immediately. The second way that this is beneficial to the market, the status quo currently, when there's a centralized institution called the Depository Trust Corporation, and it's where gigantic accounts exist with money and stock, and so you have a bunch of trades will take place during the course of the day, and then what happens is at the end of the day, the DTC looks at the net outcome of these trades. You can't trace individual trades from the cradle to the grave. So trading is allowed to happen. It's like a money laundering scheme almost, but for stock. So you can have misbehavior at one end of the transaction, and by the time it gets to the other end of the transaction, you can't say this thing, this trade that was where there was some misbehavior, some manipulative intent behind it. You can't trace it back to its origin. So that's called net settlement. The way we're putting this together, it's based on gross settlement, or what we're calling true settlement. In other words, every trade has a beginning and an end, and it's unambiguous where it begins and where it ends. And anybody with access to the internet can go through and independently verify that exactly which trades happened, when stock and money went from this account, this address to this address, and so it removes a lot of opportunity for misbehavior.
Right, and just one other question about the crypto security is: are you going to be operating that on its own blockchain, or are you going to be using the Bitcoin blockchain?
So the private debt platform is the volume of it is such that it lends itself to use on the Bitcoin blockchain. The public equity, whereas currently, and I know this is going, the whole block size debate will change this, but even under the best case scenario, there's the Bitcoin blockchain does not lend itself to the kind of transaction speed that's required to accommodate essentially an alternative stock exchange. So yeah, we're having to we're looking at and we are pursuing non-Bitcoin blockchains for that, using separate technologies that lend themselves to much higher frequency of speed of transactions per second.
Yeah, thanks for the skinny on that. I'm sure plenty of people are anticipating the full launch, but for now, I think everyone heard it's t0.com.
Going back to the T0, we're also working out. We've created a platform on which short selling, which is kind of the dark art of Wall Street, we'll be using blockchain technology to bring that out into the open as well. So that's a very esoteric conversation, and one probably not suited for this this venue. But it's we're calling it it's basically we're calling it the pre-borrow assured token, or the PAT. And that, I won't say that doesn't have anything to do with the name of our company CEO. It might, but so there's that. But beyond that, the next thing we're really working on, we're working with a company called, I'm sure you've heard of BitPay.
Of course.
They seem to have the best solution gauged toward allowing our employees to receive a portion of their paycheck in Bitcoin. So we're working with them on we're implementing a solution there. So that's kind of I'd say crypto-wise, that's kind of the next best thing. But we want to turn this group we're calling Medici. We're trying to turn the Medici into focus of Bitcoin talent, Bitcoin software development talent in particular. So we're wide open to any ideas that anybody out there has as far as alternative ways to use the Bitcoin blockchain to disintermediate and disrupt the finance industry. So we would encourage anybody who comes up with anything, who has a great idea, to please let us know. And talented blockchain developers would also encourage them to consider coming to work for us.
Well, Judd, thank you so much for your time today. This has been extremely informative. Really looking forward to see how Overstock builds this blockchain empire out of their retail company. It's very inspiring, and hopefully we'll catch up with you all very soon in the future.
Yeah, as soon as we have more to report, I'll make sure you hear about it.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you so much, Judd.